You see how bad I'm dying to talk about this book.
Let's talk about the book.
We got a new segment. Hold on before you start or say the name. We got to play the drop.
Do you got the drop ready, Phil?
Drop's ready.
Can you play it for everybody?
Yeah, sure.
It's time for Steve Reads Books, so you ain't got to.
That's right. It's time for Steve Reads Books, so you ain't got to.
Nice.
I'm surprised you let her use ain't.
She didn't want to.
Oh, you wanted her to use it.
I said, you need to say this. You need to say in a real sexy voice, it's time for Steve Reads Books, so you ain't got to. And she said, it's time for Steve Reads Books, so you don't have to. And I said, no.
Good try.
Because it's not appealing to the right audience. The kind of person that doesn't want to read books doesn't want to read books because they ain't got to. Right? So you're trying to sell to the right audience. This only came up because I read a book. When we were on the live show, the live tour, a guy gave me a book, Carroll of the Brush Country, and I realized how could the world's greatest book I had never heard of. And I liked that book, and I told people the best parts. And so I came up with this idea that what I could do from now on, like as a future business line when I retire or whatever, is read books so you ain't got to. This doozy. Listen. Okay, ready for this? This is when he's up in Alaska. He's got a guy he hangs out with named Riger who raises hogs, okay? In the early evening hours, Riger, this is all on the Yukon. In the early evening hours, Riger invited me down to the riverbank. He wanted to show me how he fed his hogs. He wanted to show me how he fed his hogs right from the river. Birch Creek teemed with fish of all kinds, predominantly pike. As soon as Riger reached for his fishing pole, it would alert all the pigs, and they would come running from all directions. Sometimes they would run between his legs and nearly trip Riger. It seemed almost as soon as Riger's spoon hit the water, a pike would grab it. Riger had a club to kill the fish as soon as he dragged it to shore. In the meantime, the pigs were all squealing up and down the bank, waiting for their supper of fish. The hogs would fight over the pike. It would take him about an hour. Now I'm skipping ahead. It would take him about an hour to feed his herd of hogs. Now he dubs this operation Riger's Ranch.
I wonder if those hogs were fishy tasting.
Well, funny you should ask. Listen to this tidbit. Okay, hold on. So hold that in mind for a minute, because there's another food tidbit. No, I'll get to your question. Okay. They got a guy in their camp that doesn't want to eat bear meat. Says he can't eat bear meat. So James Carroll, the author, kills a bear and he's going to serve it. But there's this guy that doesn't want to eat bear meat. So James Carroll cooks a bunch of bear meat. Says, he had a camp hunter. Bill Hogshead was the camp hunter. Brings a small black bear into camp. He's going to make a pot roast out of the bear. Okay? So he cuts the bear's ribs into short ribs, puts them in a pot. The guy that comes in that doesn't like bear meat asks what's in a pot. He tells him it's short ribs from Riger's Ranch. He says, no, it's not. Don't smell like fish. I learned a new wrinkle about bread baking from Stead. He had a large batch of bread raising in a big tin dishpan with a yellow tomcat sleeping on top of the dough. I thought the cat was sleeping where it shouldn't, so I told Stead the cat was sleeping on his bread. Oh, that's nothing. There is always a dishcloth between the dough and the cat to keep the dough clean. The narrator complains to another guy about it. The guy says, that's where the cat always sleeps. There's a guy that splits wood in town in Fort Yukon. He splits and sells wood to people in town, but someone keeps horking the wood off his pile. He takes an auger bit and drills out a bunch of wood and packs it full of gunpowder and sets it on top of the pile. Quickly finds the thief. Burns the thief's house down. He would get as drunk as a boiled owl.
I've only seen Mark as drunk as a boiled owl one time.
I remember one time I had 3 poor and damaged cross fox. One had no tail, one had no head. The third one had badly rubbed hips. I told Jack that I was going to try to make a whole cross fox from these 3 damaged ones. Jack didn't think much of the idea. One of the fox had a good head and shoulders, one had good hips, and the third one had a good tail and hips. I trimmed off all the ragged edges and rubbed pieces. I was good at sewing, considering the short experience I had had the past winter. I simply sewed the head and shoulders together, and then I fastened on the good hips and tail and pulled it loosely over a stretcher. The whole fox pelt was probably a little shorter than average length. When we were showing our collection of furs to a fur buyer, he picked up this tailor-made cross fox first, shook it out, and said, "Now that's what I call a nice little cross." After we arrived in town, I stayed at Jim Haley's Roadhouse for a month. Old Jim was a great soup maker. He had a large... Don't laugh. He had a large 7-gallon soup kettle that he always kept full of soup. It's not funny. I often wondered afterwards how he kept so much soup on hand without it souring on him. He must have kept adding soda to it. He used to put all kinds of small game in his soup, such as squirrels, ducks, ground squirrels, rabbits, and sometimes a piece of moose or caribou meat that the Indians happened to bring in. They were all good to Jim in this respect. Jim always had soup to serve any time of the day or night. One time, Jim had his soup pot and slop bucket sitting side by side.
Uh-oh.
By mistake, a fellow by the name of White emptied his wash basin in Jim's soup pot instead of the slop bucket. His soup was still as popular as ever. Ready for this? I remember Curly Well and I stopped at Schumann's overnight. We told him we would like to get an early start in the morning. Schumann set his alarm clock to ring at 4 o'clock. When the alarm went off, it woke me up too. So I lay awake in bed until breakfast was ready. Schumann got right up and made a hot fire in a big cast iron flat top heater he had. I watched Schumann all the time. He didn't know it. First thing he did toward cooking our breakfast was to spit a mouthful of tobacco juice on top of his cast iron heater. After this burned out dry, he made our toast on the same stove. As soon as Curly got up, I told him of the incident. Schumann wanted to know why we were not hungry that morning. We told him we had drunk some bad whiskey the evening before and that we would settle for a cup of coffee. Ready for this? That's not that interesting. Oh, no, it is interesting. In August 1912 and it's a historical tidbit. In August 1912 and 1913, I decided to pull out for the trap line. The outfit of Grub Bean Cook advanced me. The outfit of grub, the outfit of food, Bean Cook advanced me amounted to $130. I never took any bacon or lard with me. I figured on using bear for bacon and lard. Of some old guys, now this guy's the toughest guy on the planet, but he's talking about the guys that are really tough. He says this of them. The old timers. So this is the old timers at that time. They lived tough, ate tough, and died hard. That's what I would like written on my tombstone when I'm buried in the Twin Lakes Cemetery. What's this here? He's drinking with a guy named Doc. And they got a bottle of whiskey in little glasses. And he says, "Doc, had a method. I don't need to drink it so I can explain it. Doc had a method that he had a small shot glass and huge fingers. And he could wrap his fingers so tight around the shot glass that he said they acted as sideboards. And he could fit more whiskey in his cup by creating extra volume around his cup just with his fingers. And then would walk away from the bottle. It's not funny. Now he's married and he traps with his wife, Fanny. They go out for a whole season. Our catch for the season consisted of 46 lynx, 23 mink, 70 marten. He later goes on to say what he got at the fur buyer. So they go out for the winter, and I did one of those little inflation adjusters, which are kind of inaccurate. But he and his wife go out and trap. They catch, again, 46 lynx, 23 mink, 70 marten. With an inflation adjuster, they made $44,000 that winter trapping. The next year, check this out. The next year, guess how many lynx he catches? The whole country came alive with lynx and rabbits. Next year, he catches 225 lynx with his wife in one season. So that was the amount of jingle he was making at that time. He and his wife spend a month traveling through the winter to trap the Carroll River flats. They spend the whole winter, they spend the whole spring there trapping and shooting. They trap and shoot 1,600 muskrats with 3 babies with them. Curtis had his own tent and stove. In the grub line, Curtis traveled light. He lived off the country mostly. When he arrived at the flats, this is when they actually travel in. Here's what's funny. They're traveling by dog sled. They cross into Canada. They have to stop and go through customs. There's a camp that has 2 Mounties there, and they got to pay duties on all their stuff. And you pay duties on your sled dogs, but you get the money back if they come back alive. And there's guys that live there just to monitor trappers coming over the pass from the Yukon to go into the Carroll River flats to trap muskrats. Curtis had his own tent and stove. In the grub line, Curtis traveled light. He lived off the country mostly. When he arrived at the flats, he had 15 pounds of flour, 5 pounds of sugar, 1 can of lard, 1 pound of coffee, 2 pounds of butter, 6 cans of milk, 1/2 pound of tea, and 1 pound of salt. He gave us his butter, coffee, and milk. We didn't want to take this from him, but he insisted we take it and said rats and flour were all he wanted to eat. He wouldn't accept anything for it. We used to have him eat with us quite often. It didn't take much to satisfy Curtis. I used to visit Curtis often to hear him talk. Our tents were close together. One day I was in his tent when he cooked a batch of rats. He dressed out 10 rats and stuck them in a 5-gallon coal oil can. This coal oil can and a couple of lard cans were all the cooking dishes he had. He put the rats in this 5-gallon can heads down with their tails hanging over the sides of the can about 4 inches.
We should try that.
He added water and let them boil for 1 hour. Then he reversed them, tails down, heads up. This gave the tails a chance to cook. The tails of the rats are very good eating when boiled or cooked over a campfire. 8 tails with a small piece of bannock makes feed for a person. After cooking them another half hour, he would thicken the juice with a cup of flour, making a thick white gravy. This concoction would last Curtis for 3 days. Whenever he wanted to eat a meal, he would fork out of the can a whole rat together with some white gravy. This didn't allow much variety, but Curtis seemed to relish it. Rats for breakfast, dinner, and supper. When a person is hungry and a long way from a store, anything tastes good, no matter how many times one eats the same thing. Behind Curtis' sheet iron stove in his tent, he had a pile of rat bones as big as a large rat house. These were the bones from all the rats he had eaten recently. The last thing I'll tell you about Curtis, when they get done with trapping season, they go back to Fort Yukon. Curtis brings 2 large gunny sacks full of dried rats that he can eat during the summer.